Hello, everybody. My name is Phil Lanier, and I'm president of Coaching Ourselves. And I want to thank you for joining this webinar. We are proud to be able to bring you this fireside chat with Henry Mintzberg and Mitch Joel. This fireside chat will last approximately 45 minutes, followed by Q&A. Following this webinar, everyone will receive a link to the recording, and I encourage you to share with your colleagues who could not join us. This event is hosted by Coaching Ourselves. We offer organizations leadership development programs through small group discussions. Each of our 90 discussion guides spark meaningful discussion and real human connections where managers share experiences and learn from each other. During this period of COVID-19, Coaching Ourselves is offering free open enrollment virtual Coaching Ourselves sessions. It's a great experience. You'll meet and get to know other professionals from around the world, learn how they're feeling and dealing with the challenge of keeping their people connected and businesses moving forward. Visit coachingourselves.com to register for your free session. I'd also like to thank everybody who helped make this webinar happen, our colleagues from Agile Montreal, Agile Alliance, Mitch, Henry, and everybody. So our host today is Mitch Joel. Mitch has been called one of North America's leading visionaries by Strategy Magazine. He's founder of 6 Pixels Group, an advisory, investing, and content producing company focused on brands, commerce, community, and what's next. He was most recently president of Mirum, a global marketing agency operating in 25 countries with close to 3,000 employees. Mitch's first book, 6 Pixels of Separation, was named after a successful blog and podcast, is a bestseller. His second book, Control Alt Delete, was named one of the best business books of 2013. Since 2005, he's given 40 to 50 keynote presentations a year to small and medium large organizations around the world. So now I'm going to ask Mitch and Henry to join us, and we will begin this fireside chat.
And here I am. Hi, Phil. And there's Henry. Hi, Henry.
Well, a little trouble with the button.
That's okay. We figured it out. We got us here. Well, hey, everybody. I am Mitch Joel. And as you can see, we're sitting here with Henry. We are, I think, very socially distanced, Henry and I right now. Same province, a different home, definitely different city. And it's a great pleasure to sit down with Henry. I've told this story countless times, but for those who don't know, I've known Henry my whole life. He doesn't really know that or remember me, but I actually went to school with one of his daughters in elementary school. And I just remember stories of when, what do your parents do? You're so young. My father's a teacher. He writes books. I just remember biking stories of being in Europe and things like that. And then, of course, post-secondary, I go into the work environment, start reading more about business management, and I make the connection. And thankfully, over the past couple of years, Henry and I have become friendly. He's been on my podcast a couple of times. I've had the pleasure of being invited to events and just sort of riffing on ideas back and forth. We've been doing a lot more of that, I feel, in the past couple months around the work that Henry's doing on rebalancing society, as well as this sort of declaration of interdependence that he's excited about. And in talking to the people at Coaching Ourselves, Phil and Warren, and the opportunity to do something maybe a little bit different and valuable to all of you attending today, we thought it might be great to sit down with Henry and have a fireside chat. Henry is, in fact, by his fire. My fireplace is over here, but the window positioning isn't good. But you can see that there is, in fact, a fire. So we're not just calling it a fireside chat with no true firesides. We are both by the fireside. So warm welcome, Henry. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, Mitch. It's delightful, always.
So let's talk about where we're at, which is we are socially isolated. The economy is basically at close to zero. People have a tremendous amount of uncertainty. You have this concept that's been out for quite a bit about rebalancing society. Do you feel that the outcome of this pandemic might actually be us rebalancing society?
Look, I hope so. The trouble with predictions is that the optimists predict what they like and the pessimists predict what they don't like. So I will predict what I like and say yes. But who knows? I can't see us going back to square one. back to business as usual, quite literally. We've got to open our eyes to this.
So talk a bit about what you are seeing and what you are thinking. From my perspective, I've heard many people, and often I've found myself saying, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. And then you speak to people who might be thinking in a different way about what this all means. And their answer is the problem with going back to normal is that normal was very, very broken. So what are your thoughts about this and what this means? And as a segue, let's talk a little bit about this notion of rebalancing society and what you're trying to really get us to think about now.
Look, awful things are happening, and also some very exciting things are happening. People are just rethinking things, doing things different ways. Families are meeting, families that would normally get together because they're dispersed across different places are suddenly getting together regularly because they're using Zoom. Nothing stopped them from using it before. So all kinds of things are happening, and a number of them are very exciting. As I see it, when I talk about balance in society, I mean three sectors. I mean government and public sector, and business and private sector, and what I call community and plural sector. And when I look at how countries are reacting to the situation, governments are there to protect us. Businesses are there to supply us. Communities are there to engage us. If you look at the countries that are functioning best, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing governments that are moving in to protect, and businesses that are moving in every constructive way to supply, and communities engagement, even though we're all separated physically, community engagement is absolutely critical and probably more germane to people than ever. And the countries that are doing well, like the businesses that always do well, like countries that normally do well, do that in collaboration. The three sectors work together. And I don't have to say much about the opposite, where they're working at cross purposes, where businesses are exploiting, where governments are ignoring, where communities are weak. The reactions, we can see the reactions in the figures, in the cases and in the deaths.
So do you think that this is a sort of moment of this idea of a radical renewal? It's an idea you've talked about.
Yeah. I've been pushing that. I mean, my Rebalancing study book came out in 2015, and the subtitle was Radical Renewal Beyond Left, Right, and Center. And I've been promoting that, dreaming of that, hoping for that, praying for that, doing everything I possibly can. And you can see on my website under the book, there's all kinds of tables and charts and declarations and so on. So I just really hope that that when this is over, people will kind of reconsider and start. It's not painful the way this is painful for many people who are locked in their homes and can't work or whatever. But this kind of change is so natural. It's just so natural to function in that kind of collaboration, that kind of balance.
If it's so natural, why do you think we're not taking this on full bore as you would hope?
Oh boy, there could be all kinds of reasons for it. Clearly, there's been almost a coup of very narrow forces that have gained so much power, and to me, a lot of it goes back. If you look at the United States, which to me is one of the most unbalanced countries in terms of building much too far to the private sector. I love private sector businesses in balance, in their place, like governments in their place. But if you look at the US before 1989, before communism collapsed, it was very balanced. In fact, some people say imbalanced the other way. It had very high taxes, for example. It had lots of welfare programs. And all that has been completely changed because of this misunderstanding that somehow capitalism had triumphed over communism in 1989. And what really happened is that balance triumphed over imbalance in 1989. The communist countries were totally out of balance on the side of their public sectors, and we in the sort of liberal so-called West were balanced across the sectors. Because of that misunderstanding, we're all especially the United States and the UK, but all of us are going out of balance the other way.
Do you think that that's continuing, or do you think that there are glimmers of hope within the plural and the public side to sort of off or create more balance because private is so powerful?
I don't think it was. I think it was getting worse, steadily worse. Even though, as you say, I mean, we have more social initiatives, more social activity, more social movements, which don't use the word balance, but are in effect favoring that than ever before, probably in human history. Just think of all the NGOs and all the groups. It's amazing. And yet it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think that's because of the sort of the effective imbalance, and the fact that the plural sector, that the community organizations, the plural sector is obscure. It's like, you know, we use words like civil society and NGOs and not-for-profits and all that. We know about that. And it's massive. There are more co-op memberships in the United States than there are people in the United States. So it's massive, but it's obscure. And so everything reduces to left versus right, government versus business. If you're on one side, you think government's supposed to solve everything. If you're on the other side, you think it's all about fixing capitalism. And it's not. Capitalism needs to be fixed. Societies need to be fixed even more.
So let's sort of break this down, because you speak very specifically about this work. You say that the government needs to be respected, that private businesses need to be responsible, and that plural, which is essentially community, it's the word you use for community, needs to be robust. That was the one that I'm always challenged with, and we've spoken about this before. Can you explain, for those who feel like you've said, we're so engaged in community, we're doing more community work than ever, we're giving money, we have movements, how does the plural component of this become more robust to the way you perceive it or would like it to be?
Let's go into the organizational, the realm of organizations and businesses for a minute. The word I like most now is communityship. It's like I kind of coined it years ago. It's like leadership or ownership or citizenship. It's communityship. I maintain, and I think everybody else could too, you walk into an organization or business that has it, and you can smell it the instant you arrive. People are enthusiastic, they're energetic, they're respected, they believe in what they're doing. And so that's absolutely key to an effective organization, and it's key to an effective society. And if you go into a country where community is strong, really, really strong, sense of community, sense of the plural sector, you see it in everywhere. I went to Denmark once. I wrote a blog called Nothing's Rotten in the State of Denmark, because there's a real sense of community there. And you know what? It's been written about before. Businesses, like the welfare programs, entrepreneurs say, I can be an entrepreneur in Denmark a lot easier than I can be in the US. A woman who actually moved from Denmark to the States, she said, I could be an entrepreneur in Denmark a lot easier than I can be an entrepreneur in the US, because I know my family will be protected. My kids will continue to go to school even if I go bankrupt. My healthcare will continue even if I go bankrupt. So in fact, Denmark has a more effective form of capitalism than the United States because of that balance. Brazil, until this aberration of a president came along, Brazil had such a sense of community. You could just sense it everywhere. So many organizations, not only Carnival, but so much else. Quebec has a very strong, where you and I live, has a very strong sense of community, more probably than anywhere else in North America. It feels healthy. The Quebec government is strong. Some people think too strong. Quebec business is robust or respected. It's terrific. But community is the strong force here, not out of balance, because too much community and you're into Venezuela, where narrow community groups have taken control. So, you know, populism is imbalance on the side of community, and And just like capitalism is imbalanced on the side of the private sector, and communism is imbalanced on the side of the public sector.
So talk a bit about how these systems look. You mentioned capitalism, you've mentioned communism. When you talk about Denmark or Quebec, we have socialism. I always hesitate to use the word socialism as Canadian because people take it to mean something as a purist versus the socialist sort of capitalist hybrids that we live in and Denmark somewhat has. Is it that you want people, governments, countries to move more to these types of systems? Because, and look, the problem fundamentally is one where communism is control and capitalism has been about freedom, really. Essentially, the US challenge when I see it, whether it's in relation to COVID-19, gun control, health, it's just about choice and freedom. I want my freedom, right? This opening up of businesses and getting back to work is really about freedom. You see it in the signage, you see it in the rallies that are taking place. So what is that system that you feel works?
Well, let's agree to disagree on one thing. The whole concept of liberal democracy, when it came along, is if you free markets, then you free the people, and you create a better society. And it worked for a long time because the alternative was kings and despots and all kinds of things. So suddenly we threw all this power to the market and so on, and a lot of people and a lot of entrepreneurs were able to use that freedom to build the economy and so on, and they went together. Then as businesses became very large and very powerful, particularly, as I said, after the fall of communism, that freedom started to get usurped. So does the US have an open system of election? It kind of looks like it, but it has all kinds of gerrymandering and all kinds of other tricks, and that undermines the freedom of the regular people. A majority of Americans didn't vote for Donald Trump, but the system is what it is, and the powers that be will not be in a rush to change that. So the things, the notion of liberal democracy became less liberal and less democratic. But let me address what you said earlier. I am not a fan of any of the isms. I don't care whether it's communism or socialism or populism or communityism. That's populism anyway. I'm not a fan of isms because you stop thinking when you get into an ism. You know, the economists have sold us a bill of goods that it's all about markets. Everything is about markets. I love markets for my restaurants, for my food. I don't love markets for my healthcare. I love markets for healthcare equipment. The private sector has lots to do in healthcare. But I don't want to shop around which doctor is going to give me the best price for an operation. So markets work brilliantly for some things and not for other things. But so many economists have become so enamored, so blind to anything but markets, and they've dominated the debate. You know, greed is good and markets are sufficient and governments are suspect. That's the model we live in. So the idea of balance is three things. Is the three sectors, but it's also consolidation across the sectors. It's the idea that they work together harmoniously. And when I go to Denmark, I'm sure they got their problems. When I go to Denmark, I see that.
So let's shift gears a little bit. A lot of people on this webinar are passionate about work, getting back to work, thinking about how we're going to manage their working remotely. Can you talk a little bit about how we should think about managing through this in terms of our own lives, in terms of thinking about our communities, in terms of thinking about business?
Yeah, can I turn that to a little bit of a short-term thing? We weren't sure we're going to discuss that. I'll just mention very, very quickly, but I think we're getting stuck in a trap, and the trap is either we close our economies and kill them, or we open them and maybe kill people. We need another way out, and so I don't think we'll get there until we find another way out. I'm working on something that I think is another way out, because it turns out that it looks like there's another form of transmission of the virus. It could be going through the air, in which case we may have to come back by attacking the whole issue of pollution, which wouldn't be a bad thing for global warming anyway. So just to mention that briefly, but to get back, first of all, we need to be capable of getting back. And then, of course, how do we go back? A lot of people will happily not go back. Look, I used to work 70% at home. Now I'm 100% at home. I'm not allowed out because I'll get a ticket. If I try and drive back to Montreal, a 1 hour drive, I'll get a $1,000 ticket. Each of us in the car will get a $1,000 ticket. So I'm 100% at home. Not a big difference in that respect. I'm more in touch with people than ever because we're doing these kinds of things, and we have Zoom calls galore and so on. Try and find a minute to work when you around the Zoom calls. So a lot of people will find that it works for them. But like any technique, it works for some, doesn't work for others. So some people will have to go back and hopefully not business as usual, hopefully not polluting as usual, hopefully not centralized bureaucratic companies as usual.
So it's funny. I've seen a couple of articles in the past little while where CEOs during the pandemic are saying things like, the day of us traveling for one business meeting to another city are over. It's going to be mandated across the organization. Has to be a minimum of 2 or 3 reasons why you would want to get on a plane. I'm hearing other people say that I think once our CEOs and C-level executives really do experience this Zoom from home thing, it's going to create a massive impact on the smaller, more satellite offices. It's going to have an impact on how we maybe even pitch instead of going to the pitch and sort of, working that way. Procurement. I mean, there's so many facets of that change. From my professional standpoint, I see this as almost like we finally have everybody digital. We finally have people from our most elderly to our youngest because of things like homeschooling, our most elderly just because of connectivity online. We have an older generation ordering now everything, including their food and what have you, to obviously have provisions in their home. So I look at it as we finally got everybody into the system, and the output of this is going to be a real sort of dramatic form of digital transformation. I sit on the board of a public library, and we were talking about things like, instead of getting books to shut-ins, maybe we need to create a volunteer system to get them tablets so that they can constantly have books and things like that. Do you see that sort of impact hitting at the business level, at the management level, or do you think we're just reacting in the middle of this pandemic?
I agree with all that. I think I agree with every single thing you just said. It's ironic because I used to say, if you're an executive, I remember a deputy minister, those are the top civil servants in Canadian departments. A deputy minister said, I every morning I communicate with my staff at 7:30 in the morning through email. And I thought to myself, buddy, you're in trouble. Because if you don't communicate directly, get in a room with them and so on. I used to say that if executives want to know what's going on, they got to get in an airplane. I think that I agree, they will get less in airplanes because sometimes they don't need to. They still will have to get in airplanes because you don't get the mood of a factory by looking at an image on a screen. The fact that we've got Zoom and everything else makes it much easier to communicate without getting in that airplane. But you can't pick up mood, you can't pick up tension, you can't pick up all that stuff. You can't see what's going on in the factory. You can't get a good feel for customers shopping in a store without being there. So we can't go too far the other way. Clearly we're going to go constructively the other way, but I don't think we can go too far that way.
How do you see it? Well, while you're thinking,
I was going to say one other thing.
Please.
One of the most constructive aspects of that, which you didn't mention, although you implied, I think, is that it may lead to a massive decentralization and highly centralized companies, because it's just as easy to bring a worker onto the screen as it is to bring an executive on the screen, as opposed to everybody congregating on the top floor and they talk with each other because they're on the top floor and the workers are off in a factory somewhere, or the first line managers, what I call bottom managers, because we always say top management, we never say bottom management. I think we need to start saying bottom management to stop us from saying top management. But bottom management is on the bottom floor or somewhere, and so they're not part of it. Now God, you want to bring in somebody, just hit a few buttons and you got a bottom manager right on the screen. So it could lead to a very constructive decentralization of a lot of overly hyped. I'm a big opponent of what I call lofty leadership. And lofty means way up there somewhere, looking down, top management, top of what?
So the other aspect of this is education. It's an area that you've been passionate about your entire life. Again, in reading articles and hearing whispers in hallways and things like that, we're hearing that as courses come back or as schools come back, they're going to be very different. I mean, putting aside the social distancing thing, but most of them will have to be fully digital, meaning that there will be live classes at the same time as the class is being taught live, because some people can attend, some can't. We've already had many conversations about the value of these educations. You yourself have been overtly vocal about MBAs, business school, post-secondary education. What are your thoughts? Sorry?
You noticed.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, for the past to 10 plus years. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, that has a direct impact on the work that you're doing here with Coaching Ourselves. I mean, it's very related to this whole thing. How do you see that changing? Do you think this is going to be this sort of another accelerant for this? Do you think that in doing this, we're going to really miss the social aspects of being together, studying together, working together? How do you see this sort of the education component? And I'm also curious about just the social and psychological ramifications of us all being alone on screens together.
It might have the opposite effect because previously, look, if you went to an executive program or management development program, you went alone almost all the time. You went alone, you sat in a class, you did case studies, or you listened to some lecturer, you talked to the other people at coffee breaks, and then you went back to work. So this kind of social learning could be one of the greatest benefits, because now, look, I've seen programs from a well-known East Coast business school, remain nameless, that has a program which is really bad, and so very individual. We compare it to Coaching Ourselves. I would love to say, I'm not sure I'd love to say, but that Phil saw the pandemic coming, or Phil had this incredible insight, but we happen to do together what turns out to be extremely useful here, because we developed whole new ways of management development. And what we did basically was say, you don't create a manager in a classroom, you take experienced people and have them learn from each other in a classroom and share their experience. So we were doing that in our classrooms. The IMPM and the IMHL.orgs are healthcare and business for doing that. They sit at round tables, they spend half their time talking with each other. And when Phil, who was head of engineering for a speech recognition branch in Montreal, came to me and said, got to develop my managers. What can I do? I said, well, do what we do in the classroom, but take it into your office. And so Phil took it into the office and did brilliantly with it. These 90 topics, people sitting in groups and so on. Well, now what he's doing, the obvious thing, is doing the same thing online. So even when he started just by himself, he was doing phone calls as one version of it. Now with Zoom, groups get together and they can do all kinds of management development together. So it becomes a very powerful, much more social than managers who are always isolated and always working in their own offices or going to programs on their own. And they could be even more connected with each other now through a technique like that. So these social learning techniques, there are many of them. Coaching Ourselves is a terrific one, but there are many of them. These social learning techniques are incredibly powerful and are adapted not to the way things were recently, but to Zoom and that kind of thing, where it's very easy to have a joint discussion.
So like you, I think one of the things I realized quickly about getting to know you is you like to take notes like I do in preparations and conversations and stuff. So if you see me looking off, it's because I'm taking notes, I'm learning as I go, and also looking at conversations we have. And I wrote a lot of these.
By the way, I have another reason, and that is my memory is, you know, I'm a little bit old, and my memory is, so as you're writing, I'm jotting keywords, so I'll remember what the heck you said.
Well, I don't know if my memory is good or bad, but I want to remember what happened. So that's my form too, being as digital as I am. I like this. And one of the places that I took several pages of notes was you had invited a bunch of people to McGill to talk about some of the thoughts around these sort of plural, public, private challenge. And at this moment in time, which wasn't that long ago, actually, it was a couple months ago, you were really sort of forming towards this idea of your declaration of interdependence. Talk a little bit about this. One is because I took so many notes because I felt overwhelmed. And I say this to you all the time. We talk about it, you're passionate about it, and I get frustrated with it because I'm like, I don't know how to fix every community and every private sector and every government. And so how do we chunk it down? In my marketing brain, I'm trying to chunk it down in a way people can understand this. And in reading your Declaration of Interdependence, my first illumination was this idea that, we are created interdependent. We like to we have this sort of like stoic, individualistic, I'm in pursuit of this, but there is this sort of shared existence that we have, right? The only difference between you and I is space and time. Can you talk a bit about why the crystallization of this declaration, what you want people to do with it, how people can move it forward, especially I would say in the private sector? Like, let's start with us, the business people.
Yeah. Near the opening is we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created interdependent. And it goes on from there. So it's a bit of a takeoff on the American Declaration of Independence, and people can see it on my website if you just go on Mintzberg.org and look at the cover of the Rebalancing Society. The declaration is there, and everybody can sign up and do what they like. In this very house where we're sort of locked up, 9 of us got together. Actually, physically, I'm sitting physically where we were in front of this fireplace. Sort of brainstorming about how do we carry this rebalancing society concept forward, and near the end, one of the guys said we must look at the Declaration of Independence. We must look at the Declaration of Independence. So at the very end, we pulled out the Declaration of Independence and started playing with it. And then a couple of us who were driving home, there were a bunch in the car, a few in the car, but one in the back, me in the front, Jeremiah Lee in the back. And Jeremiah was reading passages from the Declaration of Independence, and the 2 of us were coming up with alternate phrases like we hold these truths to be self-evident and so on. So that's how we kind of came up with it, and then we posted it. I think it was a bit premature. Phil says I'm always 6 years ahead of everybody else. So maybe we got to wait another 4 years.
Hopefully not, but...
By the way, I want to mention that you said a couple of months ago. That wasn't a couple of months ago. That was a couple of eons ago.
Right, it's true. The world did change. Yeah.
That was like, before and after. You used to talk about girlfriends, before Sally, after Sally, BS and AS. Pardon me. But so it's going to be before P and after P, before the pandemic and after the pandemic, or I hope before pollution and after.
Right.
So moving it forward, I think first we change our beliefs. I've just done a little chart that goes like this. It's being developed now. It's not ready yet. And I have deterioration on this side. And whether deterioration is any of the isms, whether it was communism or it's capitalism or it's populism, we have deterioration that could lead to annihilation. Okay. And then we have rejuvenation kind of in the middle, which are all these social movements and social activities. And that leads to, the word I like these days is reformation. Because if you study Luther's Reformation of the 16th century, it was grounded, it was on the ground, it was a movement. Luther was just a monk who all Luther did was nail a bunch of ideas, actually theses, criticisms, to the door of a church. And that led to a massive change in religion, including the introduction, the beginning of Protestantism and so on, and changes in Catholicism. So the word I like is reformation, and it basically starts that way. It starts with a rethinking of where you're at. That's what Luther did with the 95 Theses. That's what and it's 9 of us who did it, that's what our Declaration of Interdependence. It's an attempt to reframe how we see things. And that can enable us to start consolidating. The trouble is, we've got more social initiatives and more social movements than ever before, but they're not consolidated. They're all over the place, which is good. Some are about education, some are about food, some are about pollution, some are about inequalities, but they're not consolidated around one central theme, which I think has to be the idea of bringing the world back into balance. All of them are great, but they have to consolidate to be a force for change. That's the answer to your earlier question about why isn't it happening? It's lack of consolidation. Business, just to say one last thing, business is absolutely consolidated when it wants to get something done. It knows how to use the chambers of commerce. It knows how to use Davos. It knows how to use all kinds of things where even competitive businesses get together if they want lower taxes or they want some kind of some kind of trade arrangement. They know how to get their act together. The plural sector has to get its act together, and the notion of the Declaration of Interdependence is a sort of a spark to start changing where we're going.
So let's talk a bit about the challenge that I have with it, especially in today's world, which is I agree with everything you say, and I'm on the road. I'm walking hand in hand, arm in arm, linked with you down this road. And yet, if we look at the world, what we're seeing, especially in this pandemic moment, but it was happening before, is a very nationalist perspective, a very take care of our own. You've written about Trump as an effect, but we could argue that here, even in Canada, we're seeing a lot of this, be it a reaction to other countries or not. But in this pandemic and through this isolation, I'm worried that there is a severe push even further down towards this because we are isolated now, and we are worried about things like how many ventilators we have and how many PPEs we have and things like that. How do you reconcile this idea of us knowing cognitively that we are interdependent, and yet we see every movement and people moving towards this sort of nationalist take care of our own?
That's a direct consequence of what's been going on in the world. It's a direct consequence of the imbalance, because certain businesses have been grabbing so much of the lion's share. A chief executive earning 400 times as much as the average workers, is essentially a message that says, I'm 400 times more important than you. How in the world do you call that person a leader? Okay, anybody who accepts that kind of income should be fired on the spot. Anybody, because it's narcissistic, it's self-centered and so on. So other people who are at the bottom end of that sort of say, well, if they're going to do it, why can't I do it? So we go to populism, which is essentially what you're talking about. We go to what we see in Venezuela. We go to what we see in Turkey. We go to what we see in Hungary. It's a reaction to that, as capitalism was a reaction to communism. People in the West looked at communism and said, oh my God, this is horrible. People in the communist countries, when they could get the word of what was going on elsewhere, said, we don't want any more of this. Eventually they won, and we completely misinterpreted, so we had our own ism. So we had a very narrow, there's nothing wrong with capitalism as a way of raising money for a business, but we went to this idea that capitalism is the be-all and end-all of society. It's just a way to raise money for companies, became the be-all and the end-all. That's the ism of capitalism. So along comes populism. And fascism was a form of populism, was community-based. Hitler's movement was community-based. The movement in Venezuela that has power is community-based among the poor and certain kinds of people. They're all wrong. They're all bad. And how do we wake people up? Well, people will wake up as they woke up in communism, where it took decades. We hope that that doesn't have to be the case. We hope that people will wake up before they create so much destruction that they can barely come back. And by the way, the people in Eastern Europe some are fans of capitalism, but they discovered, in Hungary particularly, that capitalism was not the solution to communism. They know that. I think balance is the solution to all of them. Consolidation of three perspectives on what we have to do in society.
So Henry, how do you feel about things like the public markets, which I believe are completely disjointed from actual business performance personally? How do you feel about things like shareholder values in relation to, the CEO statement, where CEOs are saying, look, my job is to simply deliver for the public, for the people who are the shareholders here, for the customers. And with that comes this exceedingly crazy compensation, because the wheels of consolidation, the wheels of growth have just spun and spun. I mean, Jeff Bezos from Amazon is sitting here, I think he made something like $26 billion just during the pandemic. And I don't think he's sitting there sort of twirling his little mean person mustache. I think it's a reflection of what the markets are doing. And I think he's doing some really good stuff in terms of charities. It's sort of arguable about the individual, but what do we do? Public markets, shareholder value, how do you perceive that to be? And a secondary question would be, what do you hope comes out of this pandemic? If the economy is, and it is shut down, and we come out of this, do you think that'll change that?
Shareholder value has nothing to do with human values. It's got nothing to do with decency. It's got nothing to do with anything but greed. It's a statement, a shocking statement, that nobody matters but the shareholders. So if you're working for a company and you spend 40 years working for that company, you're nobody. But if you are a day trader that bought some stock this morning that you're going to sell this afternoon, you own the company. Talk about perversion. Talk about inversion and perversion. It's a completely sick notion. We live in societies. Owners are important. So are workers. So are everybody else. The Business Roundtable of the chief executives of major American corporations came up with this wonderful statement about its about the fact that it's stakeholder value. Everybody matters. I'll go back to 2012 and look at their statement then. Same statement. 7 years earlier, same statement, and things got worse and worse and worse. So don't bother me with statements, please. I don't want to see your declarations. Show me what you're doing. Don't give me all this crap about wonderful statements. Okay, so that's shareholder value. I carry what you're saying maybe further, or maybe you have the same ideas. If we close down the damn stock markets, it wouldn't be a bad thing. If we found there are lots of patient ways to raise capital. There's the social economy, for example, that's huge now, but again, it's obscure, but it's huge. Every NGO has got a business in a way. A friend of mine who runs the Red Cross in Kenya built hotels so he can fund his other activities. He's in business. When you buy a mosquito net from UNICEF or whoever it is, it's a business. You're buying it for somebody to use. So the social economy is huge, and co-ops, as I mentioned before, are huge. Co-ops don't raise money on the stock market. Co-ops don't need the stock market. And then you got people like, what's his name in Omaha, blanking, but anyway, who is patient capital. There are other ways to raise money. The stock market with its idiotic 4 month, how can you tell how a company has changed from January to March? Or April. These 4 month reporting. And so you get these idiotic compensation systems. Anybody can manipulate a bottom line. My granddaughter who's 14 or 15, she could figure out how to do that.
It seems like we're trapped in this world of short-termism almost. And maybe this pandemic is helping us see the longer view. That's really what we're talking about ultimately, is how do we see the longer view in this world of dramatic short-termism? Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's crazy. It's just crazy. Companies that treat us well And you know, I shop in certain stores. I love it. I'm not getting a phony kind of greeter or something. I'm just, the staff is helpful. You know, I went into one of these greeter stores one time. The stock was all over the place at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Why don't they take the greeters and clean up the stock? You know, I go into certain stores. They're wonderful. They're terrific. They care. I go into restaurants where people are energetic, enthusiastic. They love working there. That's because the management respects them and they respect the management. It's not so hard. Lots of places do it.
Well, I look forward. Go ahead.
One other story. I tried to cancel a cell phone with the biggest company in this country, in Canada. You know, and I gave the whole spiel to whoever I called. Fine, now I have to turn you over to someone else. Whole spiel again, at which point she said, now I'll turn you to someone who will do it. And I blew my top, although it wasn't her fault. And I said, you know, the only reason you're doing that is to discourage me. So I won't. That's criminal. I mean, it's not quite criminal, but it's bordering on criminal. It's manipulative. I can't stand companies that do things like that. Get off my back. Give me service. Stop playing games. You know why they do it, Mitch? I'll tell you why they do it. Because they got to produce more. You're Apple. You've reached $1 trillion for the first time in history. That's the starting point. That's the starting point. How much more is Apple going to produce? You know, well, maybe Apple's run out of ideas, especially with jobs gone. So this drive for more, and if you can't get it because you're not clever, as big bureaucracies typically not, then you manipulate. Then you do all these kinds of things. The banks have been nutty too.
Well,
some of them.
I feel like I have riled you up enough to now unleash you on our participants, which is the favorite part of the show for me. So here we sit with learning for and from the pandemic with Henry Mintzberg. And it's been obviously a pleasure getting to chat with you again, Henry, and going through some of the stuff that I'm feeling here alone in isolation about the economy and management and where the world's at and how we can do better. But I'm really excited to turn it back to Phil and throw it down to everyone who's listening to jump on, attack, and or push Henry further on his thinking.
Thank you very much, Mitch and Henry. So we have lots of questions from participants. We'll start with perhaps some easier questions. Bert Elliott asks, who do you find inspiring these days? And closely related, we have a question from John Van Tuck. Where do you see examples of interdependent leadership in the world?
You know, it was interesting. I'll give you one example. That's an article recently that said, isn't it interesting that the 5 countries that have dealt with this best, they're all led by women. I find Merkel inspiring because she just sticks to her guns. She hasn't done everything right, but she's honest. She's not greedy. She's you know, same thing with New Zealand. That was one of the women, and I think 3 of them in Scandinavia that are women heads, not heads of state, but heads of government. I find these people terrific. I just find, you know, I used to say that my only hero is the little boy in the Hans Christian Andersen story, because he had not only the courage to see that the emperor was wearing no clothes, but he had the courage to say that the emperor was wearing no clothes. So I like people who think for themselves, and I'm very, very, very discouraged by so many people who just don't think. They just don't think for themselves. I think with Benjamin Franklin is that if everybody's thinking the same thing, then nobody's thinking. And you know, I admire people who intelligently, thoughtfully, with decent values, address things and understand things and try and deal with things. And we've just driven, I don't know, you know, if it's in the water, what is dumbing down so much of the world? It's very discouraging.
Thank you. So we've got another question, and we'll shift the focus a little bit towards the healthcare. Tatiana Kobe is asking, does communityship exist in today's health systems that are solely based on money, and money matters and not matter?
Well, that's a loaded question. I'd rather answer without the last part. Sure, sure, if they're so focused on money. Not just focused on money, it's focused on numbers. It's focused on numbers. You know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. What a stupid thing to say. Who's ever measured, you know, who's ever measured culture? Who's ever measured leadership? Who's ever measured management? Who's ever measured measurement? I don't know any study that's ever proven that measurement is better than non-measurement. So if we can't measure measurement, we can't measure management, then I guess we can't manage them. So we have to get rid of them. You know, we're just caught up in this kind of narrow view of measurement, and now I've lost sight of. Remind me, Phil.
So it was communityship exists in today's healthcare systems.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. So I was saying that it's hard to exist when people are so obsessed with measurement. I think measurement has killed the state school system in England, for example. Absolutely killed it because the teachers are so busy with so many bloody measures. And same thing in healthcare. You know. If I have a really serious operation and I need a really good surgeon, you know what? I'm going to pick the one with the high death rate. Okay? You know why? Not because they're bad, but because they're doing the difficult operations. And therefore they have a high death rate. And in fact, there is evidence that surgeons avoid difficult operations because they're measured on how many patients they save. So measurement just, you know, a friend of mine in England met a very senior civil servant in the health system, and he said, "Why do you measure so much?" And you know what the guy said? He said, "What are we supposed to do when we don't know what's going on?" Well, I have an idea for him. Find out what's going on. Get on the ground. Visit some hospitals. Visit some clinics. You can't visit everyone in England, but visit some so you get a sense of what's happening on the ground. No, they're sitting in offices saying, "We don't know what's going on." Tough on you. You know, we once observed somebody in a district who said she was a manager in one of the English NHS districts, and she said, "I haven't seen a customer." I think she used the awful word, or patient, but I think she said customer. "I haven't seen a customer in years." And I thought to myself, do you have any friends? Do you have any family? Every single person in England is a customer, uses the NHS. You know, what are we doing? What she meant was I didn't formally go to a bed and interview them with a chart with a 10-point scale. Don't get me started. You did get me started.
Related to that from my own professional experience, I was a big fan of Stephen Shapiro, still am his good friend, and he wrote a book called Best Practices Are Stupid. And we used to sort of laugh at the title, but what I uncovered in running an agency with multiple clients across everything from medical and pharma to telcos and banks and beyond is there was this weird thing too about like, well, what is the best practice? Where's the white paper on this? And my sentiment, which is similar to Henry's, was it's just an anomaly that worked. And to sort of make it the baseline for every business to copy as a form of competition would be the most idiotic thing. We often had that with clients. Well, who else has done this successfully before us? And I'm like, even if they did it successfully before you and presented the map to you exactly as they did it, you would never do it the same way either. And it ties into this idea of measurements that really the ones that are innovative, the ones that push forward are the ones who failed at trying many, many things over many different people over many years. And we have this sort of weird, sort of shiny object to these best practices or these white papers that are ultimately just lucky examples that worked.
Yeah. You know, Mitch, I think we've been breathing the Montreal air for a long time, so we're sort of on the same wavelength. Not that everybody in Montreal is on this wavelength, but maybe more than many other places. It's called learning. It's called learning. And if you just adopt it without learning it, you may do it dumbly. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't learn from other people's success. Of course you can. But then you've got to bring it into your own context and apply it in some intelligent, thoughtful way. That's all. Instead of everybody running around. When somebody says to me, "What's hot?" to me, that is such an angering question. If it's hot, it's probably stupid and wrong.
All right, Phil, let's go to, I think we have time for probably one or two more questions at this point.
Okay, guys. So we have a couple of questions around the sort of idea of what's next and what can we do and where are we going to go. So we have one question here. Is the new Declaration of Interdependence, which we've signed, a step to create the ignition for rebalancing? And closely related to that, we have this idea of what can we do to strengthen the third leg, the communities? What positive trends do you see here?
The answer is yes to the first question. It's meant as a first step or a spark or a sort of just a commitment. And it's a declaration, just like those business roundtables made their declaration about stakeholder value. So by itself, it's worth nothing. But if people use it as a kind of a guide, the way the Declaration of Independence was used in the United States, then it could be. How do you strengthen the third leg? Well, you start with the idea that we are the plural sector, every one of us, everybody. And not only that, we live most of our lives in the plural sector. We may work in the private sector, in a business. We may vote in the public sector in various ways. We live in the plural sector. We work out at the Y. We donate to Greenpeace. We volunteer for a Meals on Wheels activity. I maintain that everybody, almost everybody, if I say, look back over the last week and ask yourself, how many plural sector organizations you engaged with, okay? It's got to be 5 to 10 on average for everybody, almost everybody, unless you're a hermit, okay? It's us, but it can't be us alone. It's got to be us consolidated. We've got to recognize, I think this is key, many people are doing wonderful things. I can't believe that the kids at McGill, the ones in our university, have started so many wonderful organizations. They're doing amazing stuff. Each one dedicated to some aspect of this problem, maybe to inequalities, maybe to helping old people, maybe to reduce pollution with Greenpeace and everybody, whatever it is. Wonderful. They have to all keep in front of them that it's all about restoring balance in society. We will not make any headway on global warming until we recognize that it's the imbalance in society that causes the global warming, that either we serve ourselves and don't give a damn about what we pollute, or businesses make money by polluting and it's cheaper to keep polluting, or whatever it is. We will not make headway on that incredibly important agenda, urgent agenda, until we recognize that. Just talk about mindlessness. We got governments making 30-year plans for global warming. Gee, thanks a lot. They're on 4-year mandates. They'll be gone in 2-3 years. And then the next government will do what it likes. Don't give me 30-year mandates on global warming. Tell me what you're doing today. I don't give a damn what you're doing in 20 years from now, because it's not even worth the paper it's written on, the screen it's projected on. Tell me what you're doing now.
Thank you. And we have perhaps a final question, and Henry, you'll recognize this as the Irene question that we get a couple times here. This one comes from Dana McDonald, so I'll call it the Dana McDonald question. Very practically, in your opinion, what is the first action that we need to take to get community organized?
First of all, let me just comment about the Irene question. Irene is the wife of a friend of mine who read an early draft of my book, Rebalancing Society, which, by the way, can be bought like a regular book, but you can download it as a PDF straight off my website, mintzberg.org. You can have the whole book. The publisher, wonderful, talk about a great business. The publisher, Barrett Kohler, agreed that for this book, we make it available to anybody. They still sell it, but we make it available to anybody who wants it. And so I showed an early draft to Irene, this friend's wife, and who's a businesswoman, worked in different sectors, including Plural. And she said, I know, I didn't realize it's so bad. What can I do? And that's the Irene question. Everybody asks me, what can I do? So since then, since 2015, my effort has been totally dedicated to what can I do? What can we do? But every time I answer the question, the answer is, yeah, but what can we do? No matter what I say, it's got, what can we do? So I took a table. It's on that cover page of Rebalancing Society. I made a table of everything I could think about that what I and we could do. What can we do as individuals? Like challenging the economic dogma. What can we do as individuals? What can we do as communities? What can we do as businesses? What can we do as governments? What can we do all together? Okay, that's on one. And then the different things we can do. We can resist or challenge. We can construct and do better things, and so on and so forth. And on that table, it's a little complicated, but it's kind of fun. There are about 32 different things that people could be doing. So you just click on a box. I'm a business and I want to sort of do something constructive. You click on that box, you get 2 or 3 ideas. So I'm more sending people, because there's no one answer, but the answer, sort of the nature of the answer specifically is you're not alone. You're in a community. You've got to work together, and once you start talking with each other and communicating and find people who agree, you can develop all kinds of ideas that could be very local to balance the power of certain corrupt business in your municipal government, whatever it is. You just have to get together and do it. And let me say one other thing, very, very, very important. There was a guy named Saul Alinsky, who was a brilliant community organizer, just brilliant. And in his book, as I recall, there's a story about a community in San Antonio, Texas, which were really mad at people were really mad at the phone company. And so what they did is they all paid their phone bills plus 2 cents. In other words, if the bill was $32, they sent $32.02. They drove the system completely nuts because they had to show 2-cent credits for everybody, and they acquiesced. A little bit of cleverness goes a long way. You know, David picked up a slingshot, you know, with Goliath. A little bit of cleverness goes. It doesn't take much to tie bureaucracies in knots, to come up with new ideas. It's not hard. It's really not hard.
Well, I promised Phil and Henry that I would stick the landing and that we would end exactly on time. So we're close, 2 minutes over. I just want to thank, obviously, Henry for agreeing to do this so much. Everybody at Coaching Ourselves, Phil, Warren, the whole gang, thank you for allowing me the privilege to have this conversation with Henry. It really is an honor, and just hearing his brain go for me is enough to fill volumes of notebooks. So thank you, Henry. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Warren, everybody else. And I'll pass it over to you, Phil, so you can close it down for us.
Yeah,
perfect.
You're great. You're terrific.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Henry, and thank you, everybody, for giving us your time today to listen to Henry and Mitch have this conversation. Please come visit mintzberg.org. You can get Rebalancing Society in PDF for free. Come visit coachingourselves.com, and you can come and try one of our Coaching Ourselves sessions for free to see what we're talking about. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and everybody stay safe. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.